What's up, guys? How's it going? It's Kaeyoh here. Today I wanted to make a video talking about the most recent qualifier that we just played, the Dreamhack Austin Summer Qualifier for North America, and I wanted to talk about some of the meta developments that we saw, talk about maybe what we can expect to see in the one tomorrow and the rest of them coming up. So I have a couple of points that I wrote down here that I want to talk about. I want to show you some examples with the drafts themselves, so you guys can see kind of where my ideas are coming from. By the way, if you hear some like loud whistling, sounds like a train's going by or something. There's apparently cataclysmic sandstorm going out right outside the window, and I can't seem to get it to shut up. I've tried to close the window all the way, but it's still whistling like crazy. So if you hear that, that's all that is. Um, but yeah, so with that being said, let's get into it a little bit. First thing I wanted to talk about is a pattern of a comp that's becoming very popular ever since we saw it being run very successfully by Asian teams, and that's the run all over you comp, as I like to call it. And what that basically consists of, and the most core component of that comp, is a Tyrael plus a double bruiser. So this particular draft was the game we lost to C9 on Sky Temple, and in this particular draft, you'll see the perfect example of this, and that's this right here. It's and they picked it very early on, but it's Greymane, Sonya, and Tyrael, for example. You can have other variants of it. It can also be good with like a Thrall Sonya, a Greymane Thrall, whatever ends up working for you. But basically, the core component of it is that you have a Tyrael to drop Sanctifications. It's always going to be Sanctification. And you're dropping that so that your bruisers can basically just run all over the enemy team safely, and you have the Sanctification to save them from taking a huge amount of cooldown damage. So this comp is extremely effective, and you would think it'd be more easy to play around this, but a lot of times with Tyraels, especially later in the game, the Tyrael has the Holy Ground talent that blocks people in, so you are usually pretty much forced to fight them. So what ends up happening is then you try to turn around and counter engage them, and as soon as you try to counter engage them, that's when they'll drop Sanctification and just completely all in your team. And the damage that like double bruiser puts out on your team when they're completely uncontested is actually really insane, and it's very hard to do anything from. The comp can chase very well too, because the bruisers, like for example Sonya, she can stay on people with a Q and movement speed, and then Greymane's got plenty of chase tools, and then Tyrael, of course, can just keep sorting forward, giving his teammates speed, and he has all these tools that enable the bruisers to stick on the enemy team. So if you look at this draft, this is something that we definitely see prioritized a lot more now. And early on in the draft, you see they take the Greymane Sonya basically as soon as they can, and then they're going to take Tyrael. Um, Now, on the other side, we pick Thrall, which is another point I'm going to talk about later, is just the rise of the bruisers, basically, um, and talk a little bit more about why that's so strong. But for us, for example, I think it is a mistake right now in general for teams to give up the trifecta that makes up this comp, which is double bruiser plus Tyrael. If a team gets that, it's right now, I don't think there's really any direct counters that people have. Like once you get those three, you're going to have a solid comp no matter what the enemy team has. So that's something to look out for. That's the first point. That's the first pattern that I see in popular comp. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of it in the rest of the qualifiers. So the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, I guess we can just talk about bruisers in general, because what goes right along with the Tyrael run all over you comp is just bruisers in general being extremely popular and extremely strong right now. And those bruisers are going to be Sonya, Greymane, and Thrall. All three of those characters have very, very high damage. They have a lot of tools to chase and stay on the enemy team and self-sustain. Greymane doesn't really have self-sustain, but he just does a ton of damage, and he's really good at securing kills, and he can burst people down very quickly. So the mobility combined with the high damage and burst that these characters have makes them extremely good options. Thrall is probably the most highly contested out of all the bruisers, and that's because his kit is the perfect kit. It has the mobility. He's got Wind Fury. He gets the bolt at 20. He's got a ton of CC. He's got one of the best CC ults in the game, even given it was just nerfed a little bit, which is probably a good thing. But he has some of the best CC in the game. He's got the Wolf to root people, and he's got that huge stun. He's got huge poke from Chain Lightning, so you can really do a ton of pre-fight damage and just like finish off kills with poke. And he's got good defensives and sustain with his passive, and with like having block as well. So and spell shield. So he's really got everything just bundled up in one nice kit, one nice little package. So he can burst, he can sustain, he can self-sustain, he can just do all these things. So he's the number one usually in terms of contention. And then you've got, I'd say, Greymane next. And Greymane is just the ultimate kill securer, and he makes all of the kill comps guaranteed to work pretty much. You know you will have that damage followed right behind you. Then the next you've got Sonya, who has an extremely good kit for sustained fights and like just keeping a lot of pressure on the team. And Sonya puts teams in an interesting position because you have to decide, okay, are we going to deal with the Sonya, or are we just going to deal with the rest of the team and try to ignore the Sonya? And most of the time, if you ignore the Sonya and you don't get a kill somewhere, Sonya is cleaning up the rest of your team. Now, this ties me into my next point, is that with the bruiser meta, what pairs best with these bruisers are what people call enablers. And enablers are characters that allow the bruisers to go in and do what they do best. And so these characters are Tassadar, Uther, and Rhaegar. And I might be missing one, but those are the big three. Okay? And right now it's having an interesting effect on the support meta in general, because people want to really get Uther or Rhaegar, and then Tass is like a little bit of a bonus. Okay? Interestingly enough, with Tassadar, ever since the Spring Worlds, people have really started shying away from running the solo support Tassadar, and instead they're trying to use him as kind of just an extra layer of support for the bruisers, and still having a full healer like a Rhaegar or an Uther. One of the games, which was the Tomb of the Spider Queen game, let me see if I actually have the draft for that one pulled up. I don't have it pulled up, but in that game, C9 ran Medic versus us, and that's the game where we ran the aggressive kill comp, and that's exactly what you see across the board from other regions as well. When like solo Tyrande or solo Medic are being picked as healers, teams are just running basically like we're just gonna go all in on you. And that's exactly what we did on Tomb, and we were just constantly killing Medic every time she like stepped up for a fight. So back to what I was saying about enablers. You got your big three enablers, and a lot of times there's an extremely high amount of contention with them. Even with Rhaegar getting all these nerfs lately, Rhaegar is still an absolute huge asset to your team. But you really do want to have one of these bruisers on your team, so Rhaegar has somebody to use Ancestral and Lightning Shield and get full effectiveness out of. Rhaegar is still such a good enabler choice as well because of Ghost Wolf and being able to maneuver around the fight whenever he needs to. By keeping the Ghost Wolf form up and ready to use, you can basically just jump into that as soon as the enemy team goes on you. You don't need to use it offensively as much anymore. You can just use it defensively, and that's what a lot of people are doing. So that's what Rhaegar offers. And then Uther, on the other hand, is great for characters like Greymane, because he just throws the D shield on Greymane, and Greymane can just rip apart the enemy team's carries. So that's an extremely good combo, but Uther in general is just good with the bruisers. He's another enabler for that reason. Both of those characters also have a cleanse, which is pretty important right now because there's so much lethal CC in the game. So let's move on from the enablers a little bit, and let's talk about the rise of KT. So this tournament was kind of funny because people really, I don't think, realized how strong KT was until like midway through the tournament. And KT had this like really weird place in the drafts where like people were sometimes like banning him and sometimes like not banning him, and sometimes being like first picked or whatnot. And there's just like a really weird situation where like people didn't exactly know how high to the value of the KT. And I feel like by the end of the tournament, people were like, okay, KT is like really, really strong. And now I think people know KT is very, very, very strong. And I believe that we'll see a ton of KT tomorrow and in the next qualifier. So, KT might even be in that first band, first pick position over some of the bruisers, which are almost always first pick now. So another point I want to talk about, that's kind of the interesting thing with Kael'thas, which we won both of our games with Kael'thas versus C9, and I know Naventic won a game with Kael'thas versus Cognitive. Um, Another thing I just wanted to bring up too, by the way, an interesting kind of damage option is Tyrande, and we saw Cognitive run the Tyrande. Cawthon Luck was playing it, and holy crap, did he do a lot of work. So that was Starfall Owl build Tyrande, and um, if you guys don't remember, by the end of the game, he was in the 100K club, throwing out the Owls all game, and he got you know, the, what some would probably call the game-winning snipe on Fan there with the Owl. So Tyrande coming in as a DPS, pretty huge, putting out a lot of damage in the late stage of the game, not being run as a solo healer or anything like that. So we'll see if Tyrande gets some more popularity running that. Starfall does feel pretty strong now. I think in general, just a lot of the supports, like we'll see what happens with Lily, but I think Lily definitely has some um, potential as like a secondary support. She can put out a ton of damage now with Water Dragon, and it's another CC, which is so important right now. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the stun kill meta that's going on right now, and that's what we ran against C9 on the Tomb of the Spider Queen game. And really, what that was is just like us being able to chain together a bunch of CC that people couldn't get out of. We had the Dehaka, we had the Zool, we had the Sonya Leap. It was just like way too much for them to deal with. And it's kind of interesting right now with Dehaka. If you pair it with other CC, it's just crazy how much kill potential you have for those targets. And that brings me to another point, which is going to be Dehaka, who is shaking things up in the tank world finally. So right now, I'd say the tank meta itself is usually fairly stale right now because Muradin and ETC are considered so much better than the other tanks for the most part. Johanna is also pretty good, but those are the primary contested tank picks. But now Dehaka is in the picture, and on one of these drafts, I just wanted to show you. Yeah, it was this particular one where early on in the draft, we had basically decided to ban out the. Well, we had all the tanks up by the second round of bans, right? And what happens is I forget whether it's C9 or Tempo, but somebody bans out ETC. I think it was C9 that banned that out. So we're like, okay, we either have to ban Muradin or let them have Muradin. But now with Dehaka up, we were feeling really confident about just playing Dehaka instead. So we were fine with just banning out the Muradin there and just taking off both of those options. Maybe people will start prioritizing Dehaka over those huge stun tanks, but I don't think we're at that point quite yet. I think those are still really solid, consistent tanks. But Dehaka's global presence is great, and Dehaka's a fun character to watch because it can be so hit or miss. The CC is extremely tricky to land on Dehaka, and I think it's just a super high skill cap tank. So I think we'll see more of Dehaka, especially on large maps where the global can be used. It's pretty insane overall, but that's what we can expect from that. So overall, last thing I just want to say is that the DPS options right now are there's like so many good DPS right now in general that people don't need to like highly prioritize it. So people don't really like look at Li Ming, like you saw Li Ming get through a lot of drafts now, especially just after the nerfs. There's so many good damage options that mostly it's all about getting the tanks, the bruisers, and the enablers. Those are the key, most prioritized things in draft right now. And then DPS is pretty much filler at this point. But with the rise of KT, we'll see how that changes. That's what I'm really looking forward to see. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this meta develops for the next two qualifiers. Anyways, guys, hope you guys got something from this. It was kind of fun to look back at all these drafts and come up with some ideas and everything. And hopefully I can do something like this after the next qualifier as well, reflect on it a little bit. I'm really interested to see if anything changes or if stuff pretty much just stays the same, how the bruiser meta gets affected, and if KT is truly going to be first picked every game. All right, guys, with that, take care. Hope you all have a good day. See you next time.